May have done, yeah. So in the past, a lot of your organisations probably were members of AQuA. We're the Advancing Quality Alliance. We're hosted by Salford Royal, but we are an independent organisation. We work in a membership model largely across the northwest of England, and increasingly we're doing consultancy work across the country, where we work with people on a range of quality improvement initiatives from primary care, secondary care, and all across the system. I have the pleasure of being the lead for capability building, which means that I work with lots of people to put in their QI training. So I'm going to share some slides in a minute. And actually, am I going to share some slides first, or should we just go to, yeah, okay. So I'm going to share some slides. But before we get started, today really for me is about a conversation. So it'd be really great if you can get involved. I know a few of you have had issues with your cameras and things, but just sort of jump in and speak to us if you can. So bear with me a second. If you can, wherever possible, keep your cameras on. I appreciate that some of you might not be able to do that, and we'd rather sort of you were there without it on, but if you can, keep it on. We'll be using the chat box and the hands up function and all of that, but if you feel that you're not being heard, then just jump in, that's absolutely fine. And it says there about all the resources that you need are on the hub, but actually what we'll do is make sure that you get the because you're not a membership organisation, we will make sure that everything's sent out to you after the session, so don't worry about that. We have already said actually it's being recorded, but if you can, keep yourself on mute until it's time to speak, but obviously just unmute whenever you like. John's already won the prize this morning for being the person that was on mute, was telling a cracking joke, and we all missed it because he was on mute. Yeah, camera there, chat box. And overall, really, be patient with the tech, because we all know, I know we've got used to it, but it does take something will go wrong inevitably. Some of the slides won't come up, or you guys will get lost, or whatever it is. We will be using breakout rooms, and sometimes when you get pinged off into your breakout rooms, they don't go as planned. So yeah, ask lots of questions, be really curious. This is your session. I've got a load of content, but what it is me going, this is how you do this thing. I want to know how you make these things work. Is there anything there that you weren't expecting or that you want to ask me about? No, great. I'd love to hear your voices. My mum's from West Cumbria. She grew up in a little tiny place called Drigg on the west coast. And my godmother was from Ravenglass, so I feel very, very at home when I hear these voices, and I'd love to hear lots more of them, please. So right, I'm following that fly around now, trying to get on the screen. So here's a little thing that we're going to look at. So I want to sort of get your experience really of where you are with QI. I see you do lots and lots of different jobs, but that isn't to say that you aren't experienced in quality improvement in whatever role you are. We tend to think that people, just because they're in a specific job role, might have more experience, and what I would say is that isn't how I have experienced QI. So we're going to put up a little Mentimeter task in a minute. And we want you to think about where you are on this. I'm just going to give you a minute to read these. So are you a novice? So no previous experience, understand the basics. You want to find out a bit more. Is there something there about understanding the theory of tools? So, how to apply them in your practice, your role. You might even be a patient safety lead, something like that. Are you journeyman? Broad experience of using quality improvement approaches in practice. Are you Jedi Knight? Got a very deep understanding and feel confident and competent to use them. Are you a master? Be interesting to see if we've got any masters in the room. So that extensive knowledge, and you can use that in coaching situations. So I'm going to pop that slide down now. I think you'll all have an idea of roughly where you are. I'll just give you a moment to read it. I will then pop this slide down, and Ashley's going to show you how we're going to do a quick poll. the vast majority of people are in those first three. We do have a Jedi Knight in there, which I'm really pleased about, and that's a great place to be. But the vast majority of you are in that sort of apprentice and journeyman phase. And obviously it's a bit of fun. It just gives me an idea of kind of where people feel that they're up to. I would actually, I've had lots of conversations about this. Obviously, I've been in improvement a long time, so I've been around this for 12 years now. And I'd put myself somewhere between the journeyman and the Jedi Knight. I'm still a huge amount to learn. And one of the joys for me around quality improvement is, as it says in the foreword to the improvement guide, the great Don Berwick describes it as first a country and then a continent. And for me, that's the absolute beauty of quality improvement, is that it keeps unfolding. And that's where I'm going to take you today a little bit, really. So if you could pop the slides down, actually, that would be grand. Thanks, and I'll come back. So today, what I'm not going to do is teach you a new kind of QI theory. We're going to talk about how you influence and how you engage with people and how you use a little bit of tactical persuasion to get people to do what you want. So it sounds a little bit perhaps a little underhand, but actually having these tactics in your back pocket is how we manage to get things done. And why is that important at the moment? Well, you know way better than I do. You've all been out there throughout a really difficult time. I'm just going to get the slides up again. We're working in a really different operating environment to where we've been in the past. Things had already started to change, but the onset of COVID and all the things that's brought with us has meant that we're working in a really different operating environment. And it forces us to think about things around leadership for improvement in a different way. So this just a couple of images really to help us think about that. So when you're in a fairly stable environment, that's generally because things are known to people. Most of the things we do are quite close to certainty, so we've got an element of knowing what's going on and how we interact with each other, and things are relatively close to agreement. So we know what services we're running, and there might be some small changes, but we've got an element of stability. Where we are now is in that much more emergent environment, if not having been unstable for quite some time. So I'm sure a lot of you will have encountered a lot of change over the last couple of years, and may even have had services disbanded or temporarily moved to other places, or all of those kinds of changes which really affect people, and it takes us away from that agreement and certainty and puts us into a really unstable environment. Hopefully things are coming back a little bit now and people are able to start to rebuild, but it will change. So depending on where you are, that will change with the organisations that you work in, and we're still at that sort of in that middle ground. What do people think about that? Does that resonate with you? Anybody want to share anything about it? There's a few nods. Okay. Oh, I'm going to get you chatting in a minute. So why am I sharing this? So why is this important? Well, it means that we have to start to think about how we make improvement happen in a different way, because what we're looking for here is behavioural change. So when we have that stable environment, people are much more able to operate at a task level. And for a lot of us, that means that we're very, we can have a sort of project approach to what we do to making change happen. We can be very task orientated. And as you move out, it's less about the task, more about structure, so giving people a framework to work in. But actually, when we're in this emergent environment, what we want to do is ask people to behave differently. And so that takes a different type of approach to improvement. Rather than being sort of very structured and task orientated in the way that we do it, it's about making connections for people and trying to influence things in a different way. So that's why I'm sort of thinking about how we use today's session to think about that. How do you influence in that environment? How do you create some traction for improvement activities when we're operating in that space. What do people think about that? Does that mean anything to you, or do you think what I've just said isn't relevant? Be really interested to hear what you've got to say, John.
I'll make sure my mic's off first.
Good.
Yeah, I work in a project management team, and I think
Okay.
our biggest issue at the moment is that a lot of the people that we are working with around quality improvement, it could be to do with outpatients, it could be theatres, it could be around helping with the urgent emergency care, is that people are so swamped, so busy with the day-to-day operational change that therefore it has an impact on how much time, how much commitment, how much sort of change that they can actually deliver.
Absolutely.
And therefore that impacts on how well we can deliver that quality change, and that's probably our biggest hurdle at the moment.
And I think that's really interesting there when we're thinking about influence. Sorry, I tried to say three things together then. And so just as a bit of background, I was as an accountant in the NHS for the first 13 years of my NHS career. So I've been around getting on for 30 years now, and half of it was as an accountant. So I was very much about task and structure. And that I then went into more of a project type role to take on business improvement, and then moved out into quality improvement. So I've kind of taken this journey myself, gone from, what are the practical steps that we need to get people to do to change, and realizing now that actually it's much more about those conversations. And I think when we have those two things coming together, John, what you've just described there, that you're trying to help people and support them with a very practical set of tools, techniques and actions, and actually they are in a different space kind of trying to juggle plates. And that's when it's really important that we kind of think about how do we operate in a different environment or use our influence in a different way in order to work with those people. Because I know turning up with a set of spreadsheets and we should have done this by last Tuesday sometimes is not well received, and I've been in that position myself. So it's thinking about how do we do that differently. So we all influence and persuade all of the time. So it might be children's behaviour. Think about those tactics that lots of us have used over the years to get our not just children actually, but our families and our loved ones to do what we want them to do. It could be persuading colleagues, about changing their working practices. It could be when we're working with partners across the system, and I know we've got a lot of people from across your network. You all do very different roles. How do we persuade when we haven't got the power base? How when we're working in a system and you might be sort of a lone wolf out there, how do you create that level of persuasion? And we do it all the time, but we don't often take that step back. We don't think about how it is that we are going to plan our persuasion tactics, or to think about planning a strategic conversation around how we're going to get what we want out of it. I'm happy to be challenged as well, by the way. So if you go, well, I do that all the time, that's great, and let's hear how you do it. But I just want to think about that. So I'm just going to give you a minute, and then as a group, I want you to think about how often do you plan to influence others in your improvement activities? And when you do, what's your strategy? Just take a minute and then pop your hand up, or let me know that you want to speak. Or indeed say that you don't. Apologies if I don't say this right. So Dolapo?
Yeah, you did well. Say 90%. Hi.
Okay, thank you.
So for our team, the PMO team, it's basically an ongoing conversation. It's what we discuss every other day, if not every other week, because we understand that working with different stakeholders, also multi-level stakeholders who have different vested interests based on their business as usual, or wherever they find themselves, the services and all. This cross-cutting projects we often have, we need to have a level of influence on how they respond to the projects we are handling. And sometimes it's difficult to get that kind of engagement we want.
Yeah.
So constantly every week we seek new ways to improve how we engage with the stakeholders, and also how we can get people that will be able to influence their decisions. Take, for example, if you're working on a project that has to do with transformation of clinical services, would often think, how do we get the medical director, or say senior management in the clinical side, to buy into the project and own it as their
Okay.
own, because then we understand that until that happens, we'll not be able to get engagement from service managers or clinical leads, to mention but a few.
Okay.
So constantly we are refining and trying to define new ways of working, new strategies to see how we can engage people and make them understand that this is your project. We are just basically managing the timelines and the milestones, but it is yours. So we don't take that power from them to say, we are making them do these things, but it's just basically we're saying we are trying to help you deliver what you want to achieve.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what we do.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
No, that's
And the comment is right. Yeah, John is a Jedi.
yeah. No, that's John's a Jedi. I love that. Oh, sorry.
I might look like a Jedi. That's the only thing.
Given the Star Wars characters, that could be a lot worse, John. So
Not if I look like Yoda.
I don't know. He's quite like Yoda. Anyway, moving on. That's the bit you need to cut, Ashley. When you edit. Yeah, that was really interesting what you were saying there about how you take that step back to think about how you can get other people to be engaged, and I think that's really interesting. So we do a lot of work around stakeholders, and we think about what is it that they could do to be engaged with us often, rather than kind of what is it that I could do to change my approach. Yeah, so I think it was really, you covered both bases there, because often what we see is that people go, well, so I'll give you an example. Years ago, I worked with somebody, she was probably one of the most intelligent women I've ever met, and worked in a business environment where she was telling people that we would run out of beds at a certain point in the year. And, I've got my spreadsheets, it's telling me we're going to run out of beds in February. And nobody heard it. Guess what happened in February? And this was back in the day when, this was unusual. I know this isn't usual now, but it was back in the day. And everybody looked a bit shocked and went, oh, what's happened? And that particular individual had spent so much time being able to prove that. She came at it from a particular angle. She had a spreadsheet, she had the numbers, she worked it all through. What she didn't have was that ability to kind of describe that situation from anybody else's perspective. So one of the things that I'm going to give you in a few minutes is how to think about that sort of thing. Anybody else got any thoughts on when you plan to influence others in your improvement activities and what your strategy is? Anybody got anything else they want to share? You're a very quiet bunch. Is this because it's a wet Thursday morning? Go on, John.
It's more just a comment about the last statement you had. Sometimes it's not about what is said, it's who that's saying it as well.
Yeah.
So unfortunately at times there's a phrase, you can't be a prophet in your own kingdom. So it's not, it's not.
Well, I like that.
We might be able to say this is what we need to focus on, this is what we need to change, but in some cases it needs an outside influence to come in to say exactly the same thing. But then people listen, and that is a frustration. Okay,
and that's a really interesting point, isn't it? So how can you create maybe some of those people? There's a little task for you, a little challenge. How do you create those people? that do have that influence. And I guess that's interesting from my point of view, I guess, because I'm seen as an independent voice in many of these situations, because I work for AQuA. Yeah, not necessarily seen with expertise, but certainly seen as that independent critical friend, and that I suppose is something that I've become quite aware of. Now I can see that I've got somebody called something Raina Smith, but I don't know what the first bit is because it's not on the screen. So come in, Raina Smith.
That's me. It's David.
Hi, David.
Hi. Yep. So I was just thinking there. It's obviously, you know, when we're in a work environment, not everyone will like us. You know, not everyone likes every type of personality. But I think in instances where we're trying to influence people and change views and ideas, it's important to build that rapport and go that extra mile to make sure that people do get on with you and people do, you know, bringing a cup of coffee to someone goes a long way kind of thing. And, you know, I'm not saying bribe people, but, you know, I mean, just make sure people are on board with you, and then they might be on board with what you're saying.
I like that, David, and we will give it a different title to bribing shortly. Okay. We'll put some academic theory behind it, and then you've got a legit reason to bring your brew in. It's funny, I was talking to somebody, quite a new starter here the other day. I was explaining that I started as the filing clerk at Norfolk Health Authority, and that was one of the things I learned very quickly, and probably why I, you know, I'm reasonably good at being an improvement person, was who are the people that I need to go and befriend? How do I go about doing that? And because I was, you know, the new starter and doing the filing, I got to know all sorts of things. People told me their secrets. It was so I think that there's a really interesting sort of characteristic there that I think has probably stood me in good stead. And so how do you get people on side? So cup of tea is always a good one, David. We'll come to that in a minute. Thank you for sharing some of those things. I'm going to give you sort of a very practical thing now. Has anybody heard of Patterson's 6 sources of influence? Some of you might have done. That's what I'm going to share with you now. So here's a bold statement. 92% of New Year's resolutions fail. Yeah. Why is it? Why does that happen? I mean, is that true to start with?
Usually they are spontaneous decisions that have not been carefully thought and planned.
Okay, really good answer. Anybody else?
Doing too much at once.
Doing too much at once. Yeah, absolutely. What else have we got? Unrealistic, lack of commitment. Yeah. Anything else?
You don't really want to make the change.
Yeah. Often, if they're New Year's as well, there may be other influences at play on New Year's Eve. Where you go, that's a great idea. I'm going to go and run a marathon next year, and then you wake up the next morning and think, oh, what was I thinking last night? So yeah, not something you really want to do. Not really thought it through. Not having a good plan. Yes, Laura, absolutely. There may well have been some jollies the night before, and you got cajoled into something. But the other thing is we often try one solution and then we give up, and because changing human behaviour is really hard. So all of those things you've just talked about come into play. So you know, it seemed like a great idea at the time. You thought you might go about, you know, you've got that desire to do something, but you haven't necessarily put other things in place to help you do that. What I think it's James Patterson, no, Kerry Patterson even talks about is having sources of influence, and that's books there. There's a reference there to it, and there's a number of things on the internet that you'll be able to find. So when we talk about large scale change programs, what we often find is that people are really good at setting those specific aims. So they, you know, put it in there, it's very specific, they do something that's measurable, and they make sure it's timely. That's great, so tick that box. They've got a plan for regular measurement. We're going to measure it often. We've got that strategy in place. We know what it is we're going to do, and we've probably got some sort of driver diagram or a plan on a page which shows us that we've identified those vital behaviours that have got to change. But the problem is we haven't got a rigorous influencing strategy. So we have all of those things there, and we just kind of leave that stuff to fate. So What six sources of influence does is allows you to have a way of thinking about how you might strategically plan to influence those changes. And the 6 sources of influence are shown in this grid here. So basically it's a 3 by 2, and 2 of the factors are about motivation and ability, and then that's structured in a hierarchy. And often we forget one or the other. So when we say, why didn't that person do that thing, we'll assume that often that they just couldn't be bothered, or they didn't want to be involved in it. When we get into it in more detail, we often find that we didn't give them the ability, or they didn't know how. So on a very personal level, there's the as an individual, did I want to do it? Did I want to go about making that change? What motivation did I have to do it? But actually, did I know how to be able to do it? Did I know what it was that I was being asked to do? And if you take that to a higher level, you can start to think about the social aspects of that. So as an individual, I might want to be able to do something, but do those around me support me to be able to do it? Am I happy to be the only one that does? Or do I want to stick out? Am I brave enough to be that lone wolf that's out there? And again, from that aspect of it, did I have access to advice to help me make that change? So not only the training, if you like, but once I've been told what I need to do, who do I go to on a regular basis to just keep checking in? How do I get coached around this? How do I maintain that level of motivation? So you can see how the two things go hand in hand. And then lastly, the structural elements of it. So when we're asking people to change, what's the reward going to be? Have we told them what the end game is going to look like? Have we defined what it is that's going to be different for them and how much better that's going to be? Or indeed, if it's a regulatory thing, what might happen if they don't do it? Have we defined that punishment? You know, is this something that's keeping the wheels on of the organisation, and if we don't do it, the lights are going to go off? You know, that could be the other element of it. So it depends whether you want to go from a positive, you know, we're going to this great new shiny space, or actually, if we don't do this, you know, the regulators will have something to say about it. And alongside that, it's about creating the right environment to support the right behaviour. So often when we put new systems in, we could put a fail-safe in there that says you cannot press this button, or you cannot submit to this referral unless this information is included, or you cannot, you know, we can't change these elements of a pathway because this hasn't been agreed to. Whatever it is, those structural elements have to be there as well. So often when we look at why people don't do things, we might hone in on one of these areas without considering the others. Does this model make sense to people? Have you thought about it on those different levels before? No, there's a few shakes of the heads, and I think it's really quite, on a very practical level, it's quite useful. I mean, I'm going to give you opportunity to go and have a think about it in a few minutes. So here's a little example. So post-COVID 2020, and we decided we were going to lose £14. As you can see, I could do with it. And here's the reasons why it didn't work. So I tried eating healthily, but soon started snacking and having takeaways. I gave up on my goal. This is so true, right? You know, I started off with COVID. I was a big girl anyway, and I said, I am not putting weight on, and I was so good. And I only bought what I needed from the supermarket because I was not going to be one of those people that stocked up and all of that. And I did really well. And then the takeaways started opening again, and I was like, oh, should we just, you know? And it was really easy in that post-COVID thing to go, oh, I'm just going to do these things. And that's when my goal started to slip. So if you think about these 6 sources, then that's just another way of describing them there. So we need to help people do the right things and provide the right level of encouragement. So I had the personal motivation, and I really wanted to lose weight to meet my own goals. But where this fell away was I didn't address the personal ability. So I wasn't sure of the best techniques or how I needed to go about it. social motivation got all wiped out because my friends kept tempting me to eat out. They're like, come on, this such and such is opened, let's go get that. And I mean, let's face it, all the restaurants started doing takeaways, didn't they? That's not helpful. Social ability, didn't seek out the experts who could offer me the right guidance. I valued, so in terms of that structural ability, I valued the short-term satisfaction over the long-term goal. And how often do we see that happening? And that structural motivation, I came home to unhealthy food that was tempting me all the time. So somebody had filled the cupboards with things that I didn't, that I shouldn't be eating. So you can see with that really simple weight loss goal there that you can see how this might work. So what do people think about that? Can you see how that works with that example? Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do. So yeah, I didn't change my behaviour because the influence wasn't strong enough. Basically, had that personal motivation, but I gave up because I didn't address those other sources of influence. What Patterson says is that if you use at least 4 of these, you are 10 times more likely to succeed. And that's a quote taken from the Influencer book. And you can see here the sorts of things that we might have put in around that. So you could have used taken regular photographs to make sure that I was on track. I could have used some online information. I could have got my partners involved. You know, you could have joined a friend, colleague, cousin, whatever, and actually going who's already done this thing, created rewards, that kind of thing, cleared out all the unhealthy food out of the kitchen. It always annoys me, you know, when healthy me does the shopping and unhealthy me wants a snack. You go to the fridge and you go, oh. So yeah, those sorts of things really matter, and we sabotage ourselves all the time, and we do it in our improvement work. We don't set ourselves up to actually make the changes that we're asking people to make. So, Ashley, are we able to have some breakout rooms?
We are indeed. I've
Fantastic.
got 4 rooms of 6.
Marvellous. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to pop you into some breakout rooms, probably for about 10 minutes. And we're going to ask you to think about what you could do to influence this outcome. So scenario is you're working within the health and care system to introduce a new referral pathway between primary and secondary care. What are the sorts of, it's not going well, people aren't using it, and you've got together to go, come on, we need to look at this differently. I've heard about this model, how might we use this model to help us? So we're going to pop you into your breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and then we're going to bring you back and let you have that conversation. Just going to quickly go round. Ashley, what was room 1?
Room 1 was Graham, Sophie, Chris, Abby, Julie, Sarah.
What were your thoughts on it? Did it work? Was it useful? Did you get anywhere with it?
No.
No. Okay. Not useful. Didn't get anywhere. What was the no to?
Sorry. No, we didn't really kind of come up with a solution.
That's fine. How did you find using the model?
Well, that was the point. We were too busy discussing it. We never actually got anything written down.
Okay.
To actually fill it in.
Okay. And was the actual model? What was your conversation then?
The basic conversation was, where do we start? Where do we start? And how do you do this? And then we were looking at the model, yeah, but we didn't actually get to the point where we were saying, well, we can actually fill it in. We're really talking about how it was more about engaging with people. The discussion really was about engaging with people. How do you engage with them, and how do you make them kind of deciding how you actually, when to approach people, when where you approach people, and who you actually get involved. So I say we didn't really get to the point of filling in the model.
No, that's fine. That's good if it was a different conversation. Okay. What about group 2?
That was Kate, Tracy, Melanie, Michelle, and Kim.
Did you get any closer to thinking about the model?
Michelle very articulately sort of talked us through what would fit into the different sort of grids. So we did work through it. We felt, yes, that we could map it across. And then like group one, we actually sort of then got into a different conversation around, you know, is it influencing? Is it engaging? Is it engaging to influence? And at what point of the service or quality improvement does that start at? And yeah, I think similar to group one, we were sort of thinking, well, you know, from experiences, it was around if you engage with people early, one, you're sort of helping in terms of the planning process further down the line, and trying to sort of identify where some of the barriers might come from to then sort of apply that model right at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have had, and a good prompt really about let's do it early, let's be clear about and you can build that into your planning then, can't you?
Yeah.
Right
Others from the group, is there anything you want to add? I've just sort of blurbed all of that.
No, I think
you got a thumbs up from Tracy.
Thank you.
Smiles from Michelle. Yeah, thumbs up from Michelle. Excellent. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Group 3.
That was Isha, Delapo, John, Karen, David, and Claire.
We should have probably voted for a chairman, shouldn't we, at the start of this?
Yeah, I should have said as well, to be fair, instead of just bringing you back. But
well, I think one of our problems was that we had a recollection of what the grid was, but we actually didn't have it in front of us to view, which would have probably helped us as a prompt. But we were talking about, you know, from a personal point of view, do we have a clear understanding of what the referral pathway was? Do we know from a social point of view, did we know who would influence each stage of that pathway? A really good point one the team made was around actually, you know, who was the influencer? So, you know, from a referral process, if it's clinical, if you've got a clinical lead who's well respected, you're probably going to get more chance of getting change happen than if it's a non-clinical person, because they've got that clinical respect that they're also looking at actually from a point of view of how it's been used perhaps elsewhere as well. From a structural point of view, you know, do we understand, for instance, what are the benefits? So what's going to motivate people to make a change? And I suppose the ability to do that is to actually have something like a reporting structure. I know that's one of the things that we as a team have actually changed quite recently, is actually trying to simplify the reporting structure so that we can drill down to identify what are the key issues for now or for the next month, and also really stressing about, you know, what's the flow chart for this happening and what are the benefits that this will release.
Brilliant. So the kind of the headings allowed you to think about things in a different way without the rigor of the actual model, which is fine. All models are wrong, some are useful. You know, that it's a useful kind of thought process to have gone through. Thanks, John. And lastly but not least, group 4.
That was Oliver, Toby, Emma, Fiona, Laura, Kate, and Rachel.
Sitting here thinking, do I play the waiting game and hope that somebody
Go on, Rachel, get in there.
Anyway,
go on.
Yeah, so we were fortunate because Laura had screenshot the model, so we actually had the model in our group, so that was helpful. So we did reference it and kind of spoke about, you know, how we might influence in each of those areas. So one of the areas that we looked at were, you know, do peers support this? So thinking about, you know, is there another area that have already adopted this? You know, what was their experience? Where were they at the start? Where are they now? and you know, has it been a positive experience for them in terms of that influence? I also spoke about, you know, quite often when we're introducing new IT systems, we tend to have an expert within the area, so somebody who's given additional training, which probably goes across those two within the social, you know, in that they've got access to somebody who has a better understanding, who's also their colleague rather than an expert.
Yeah.
I mentioned that in terms of the punishments and rewards, that sometimes it can feel a little bit arbitrary around the punishment, not something I necessarily feel comfortable with, you know, so quite often we'll do something to change a referral process, and then after a designated period of time we'll say if we receive a referral on a form that isn't the current form, we will send it back. But one of the things that Kate mentioned was that there are 32 GP practices, and within those there are numerous staff, so actually you could be resending a referral back to somebody and that is the first time that they have ever heard that the referral process has changed, and therefore as an influencer that probably is quite a negative influencer. You know, so I just think it's kind of, you know, being a little bit careful with, you know, sort of some of the punishment and how you actually use and apply that. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Oh, shakes the head there. Thanks, Rachel. That was lovely. You brought up some really interesting points there. I think, as I say, some models, all models are wrong, some are useful. This is one that I'm throwing out there. It's quite a practical kind of, you know, have you thought about these different bits? It's I like to use it as a kind of an unsticking sort of tool, if you like, you know, and so you can use it at the beginning to plan your influence. That's great, having a strategy, but also further down the line, having that just there as a kind of, hang on, that didn't work quite as we expected it to. What have we forgotten? What were the influences that are at play here? What are the things that are pushing against us that are stopping us doing those things? So you can use it in lots of different ways, and obviously that's prompted lots of conversations with you about how you do engage, at what point, and those sorts of things. So as with all of these things, use it, don't use it, it's there for you to think about, it's there as a prompt, and whether you use it for your planning or whether you use it further down the line to kind of go as a problem solving tool, up to you, there to use or not, or even just a set of conversations. So great what's come out in that. So we're going to move on now to think about you as an influencer. So rather than what are the things we can do, I'm going to get you to think about you as an influencer. So I think my mouse again now, making me laugh. And we go. So just want you to take a few seconds to think about someone that you consider to be good at influencing and persuading others. So we all have somebody in our heads that we go, God, they're really good at that. Who is it? What sort of characteristics or behaviours or tactics even do they display? What's positive about the way they act? And is there anything that you don't like? So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to have a think about that, and then we're going to have a conversation. It's cold in here now. I had to open the window because it was so hot, and now it's not cold. Okay, another 30 seconds, and then I'm going to warn you, I'm going to pick on someone. You're sitting there now going, oh no, 1 in 26 chance that it's going to be me. Okay, so I'm going to go to somebody that I don't think has spoken yet. So, Abby.
Hello.
Hi.
I kind of had a feeling you were going to pick me.
Did you? Do we have that telepathic thing going on there?
I did.
Well, so Abby, so you look like you might have been thinking about this. So you don't have to tell us who it is, but what sort of characteristics or behaviours does that person display, or do they use tactics?
Yeah, and I think it was something that you kind of maybe touched on earlier, that I recognised in this person when you were mentioning kind of picking the right people in the room, if that makes sense. So they're very good at who do I need to know, who do I need to get close to, who do and not necessarily like on a work level, but more like on a informal personal level, and that's always I think something that I admire in them, that seems to get them quite far, or they know how to approach, and also being very direct, and they're not very woolly in how they talk. You know, if they're gonna go for something, they make it clear as to what they're after.
So that's the sort of positive stuff, and the things that they're very positive. Is there anything about them that you don't like, or the way that they behave, or the tactics that they use that you don't like?
I think it can be quite challenging sometimes, maybe not always taking into account other people's perspectives. But I mean, that's very minor. I think the positives outweigh the minors, but that's the bit that I find maybe more jarring.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing. We don't have to, again, conversation that I was having the other day with somebody, it was like, you don't have to like me, but we do have to have that mutual respect and understanding of each other about where I'm coming from, where you're coming from, and how we can meet that bit in the middle.
And I think that's nailed exactly that, what that person's like. She has this air of kind of command and respect. And I think she gives it, and I think that's what makes her receive it as well. But yeah, I think a lot of it is that getting to know the people that she needs to know.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Abby, and thank you for being so magnanimous about me picking on you.
No, you're fine.
So I'm going to go to Graham. I'm going to pick on you now. So you weren't quite so waiting for it, were you? So yeah, what again, don't have to say the person.
I'm going to go someone for a little bit random. It's not a work one. Someone who I think is good at influencing people. I don't know if you've ever watched any of Russell Brand's YouTube videos.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen any of them. I love everything he says.
There's a lot of it. But it's an interesting one, because I kind of go, should I be liking this? So go on.
Okay, this comes with the disclaimer. I'm not a raging conspiracy theorist.
Okay.
But what I like about him is that he's really open and transparent, and he can articulate very complex things into a way that, you know, someone who hasn't got this mass vocabulary and understanding of the world can understand. And what I also like is that he's very honest about his own misgivings, which I think a lot of people are not. And by doing that, it shows that, you know, he's human like the rest of us. What I quite like about the message he gives is the information that he gives to sort of the masses, because I think he's got about 6 million YouTube followers. So it's kind of like having his own news network in a sense. Do you know what I mean? And he can give you information and find sources of information that the mainstream media might not. Now, while I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I don't always think the mainstream media serve our best intentions. And, you know, another thing is he doesn't have a self-fulfilling agenda, which, you know, mainstream media or politicians, they quite often do, I think. As for anything I don't like about him, I can't think of anything really.
And I guess what I would say is some of those things that you've just described as positives, other people might well see as the things they don't like about him, because he's quite an acquired taste, isn't he? He's the sort of guy that is a bit Marmite, I suppose, is how I'd describe him. Some people would be like, you know, and I describe him as a bit of a you know, I can't think what the word is, but, you know, should I really like this guy? Yes, I really do. I like what he's saying. There's that kind of,
because I think you think about like what he used to be 20 years ago, like the Big Brother presenter, and you know, the married to Katy Perry and all this kind of thing, and going off the rails, and then
and then you see this guy that he is now. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is that kind of, is there something I don't like? I think that what we find is when we see somebody that we go, I can really admire that trait in you because I can see how you influence, I can see how you get what you want out of a situation. We often recognise things in them that we don't like about ourselves, and that's the bit that jars with us. So there might be things where we, you know, it's like, that's making me challenge myself. Do I come across in that way? And the reason I've asked you all to think about this is there'll be times when you're great in these situations, and then there'll be other times when you go, oh, I don't like the way I just handled that, or actually this brings out an element of me that I don't like. And that's a real challenge for us, because we all have a natural way of influencing and persuading others. And I guess I use those two words interchangeably, but how do people feel about the words influencing and persuading? Are they interchangeable? Are they the same thing? Does one make you feel better about doing it than the other?
Influencing feels a bit more subjective, like you're not aware of it, whereas persuading feels like it's a bit more collaborative.
Okay.
To me, anyway.
What do other people think? Claire?
I might be saying the opposite to what I was just saying, but influencing feels more like the person's open to the suggestion, whereas persuasion feels like more you've got to bring them from an opposing position.
And this is the David, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I feel like influencing feels like it might be covert almost, you know. I again like the opposite of that, which is really interesting. I feel like if someone's trying to influence me, then it feels maybe a bit underhand, whereas persuading, it feels like they're putting all the facts on the table and letting me decide.
Okay.
But yeah.
What do other people think? It's an interesting one. This comes up every time. For me, I think persuasion's a bit more covert, but we'll come to that. And we'll come to the reasons why. So it is an interesting one. And the reason I ask is because often people recognise some of these characteristics and they say, I feel like sometimes they get what they want despite knowing that's not what I want, if you see what I mean. So it's yeah, just recognising that people will have agendas, and that you might see that and go, they were really clever about that and got me to where I want. And you can learn that as well. And whether you call it influence or persuade is interesting, but you'll probably take on one or the other. So here's some theory. We've got about another 20 minutes together. So these guys, Musselwhite and Plouffer, put this article in the Harvard Business Review a little while back now, in 2012, I think it was. And they talked about us having different influencing styles. So as individuals, we have a natural influencing style. Nice, like an acronym there. It's always useful to have one, isn't it? So BRAIN. So you might be bridging. Those people are those that build that coalition. They do lots of listening. They're able to hear what's going on, and they're able to sort of reflect that back, you know, to the way that different people will want to hear that. We've got the rationalizers. So that was that lady that I was talking about before, who went in there with her spreadsheets and her logic and sort of went, this is where we need to go. Yeah. And was really clear about that. She also had an element of asserting in there. So that kind of, this is the idea. I know where we're going with it. And this is the action that we have to take. And I'm sure many of us have met a lot of asserters, particularly in the sorts of roles that we're in. We grow asserters in health and social care, and encourage people to have that drive to action. In the improvement world, the inspirers are the magicians, if you like. They draw on people's passions. They try and create new possibilities for people. They're the ones that are going, I don't want to see your project plan. I just want to know how we're going to get over there. They're the ones that you can take with you. And then we've got the negotiators. and they're the ones that keep the peace, compromise. They've got their eye on the prize, but they'll help people to get there. And you can see how this might be quite different depending on what role you're in, alongside your natural style, and whether you are able to flex between the two. And I'm sharing this with you because I think you'll look at that and go, where do I naturally sit? So that's my question, really. And you can share with us, or you can just have a moment to think about that. But I want you to think about what your natural style is. Where do you go most of the time? And just whilst you're thinking about it, I would say that when I was in my finance role, I was a rationalizer most of that time. So I'd get my facts and figures straight, and then I would try probably a bit of negotiating. So sitting down with a budget holder, trying to get them where I needed to go. I'd probably do a bit of negotiating, and occasionally I'd drop into asserting, depending on what the end goal was. You know, it's like, well, we have to do this. When I moved into the improvement world, I discovered that being a bridger was probably the best way of influencing people, and then probably nudging into negotiation. Occasionally you touch on inspiring. So I had to learn a different set of kind of influencing styles and think about what other people might need. When I'm under stress, I go back to rationalizing. And that's important for you to understand those things about yourself, because when things are going really well and you're able to kind of go, so I did a bit of inspiring today and I did a bit of negotiating, and then when the chips are down and somebody's going, is this happening by Friday? You might drop back into whatever your natural style is, which might jar against where you've previously been. Does anybody recognise this? What do people think about this as a model? So Isha says, oh, it's gone off the screen now, it came up. Isha says, rationalising style, tend to use that too when influencing. Yeah, absolutely. What do other people think? What do we like? Do we like this as a model? Do we recognise it? Can you see where you sit?
I just say that, so working from home, I can see and think about my husband. He's not here today. He's not here today, so I can talk about him. Talk quite nicely about him. But he's definitely got a negotiating style. So lots of people ring him to complain about something or somebody, and he always sees it from the other person's point of view. But I find that, and that's good, but I find it irritating sometimes when I might be moaning about something and he then tries to see it, and I just think, no, stay on my side. But he just won't. He's a very fair in the way he sees. But yeah, I would say I'm inspiring or bridging, definitely.
Okay, and that's interesting that you've just brought out something there that's that jars for you sometimes. It's like, but I want you to be on my side. Yeah. So absolutely that. So one of the great things about your husband is that negotiating style, being able to see it from other people's perspectives, but actually maybe being so rigidly in that could be a negative if they're not able to step into that bridging space, which then says, actually, I can see it from your perspective, and on this occasion, I'm going to come down on your side. So yeah, it's an interesting. Thank you. You demonstrated there why some of those work. Thanks. Anybody else got any thoughts on this?
If I can...
Yeah, I just put something in. Oh, no. Where you go?
We're sat next to each other. I'll let the laptop go first.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I just put something in the chat box about me being half and half of a rationalizer and a negotiator, because I try to put logic to things, like make people see, okay, this is why we need to do this, and try to put the facts, the figures of why it would be great to do what we're doing. And sometimes too, I also try to negotiate, okay, if we can have it this way, can we have it this way? How do you want to have it? Yeah. And then we can, come to a compromise.
Thank you. That really fits with what you were saying earlier on. So yeah, can really see that in you. Graham, do you want to share? And then we've got Isha.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I've got different styles inside of work and outside. So
Okay.
I'm a project manager, so I think because I'm not really an expert in anything within the NHS, and my job, if I find, is to get the experts around the table, then we can plan how we're going to deliver something. So then, that resonates with the bridging element of it. But then there are times when you do need to be assertive because you've got deadlines and targets to meet. But then outside of work, I'm not that way at all. I'm much more of a rationalizer.
Okay, which is what you've just done. So you've used that style, that you've worked through that, going, what am I? Yeah. And you've worked through that, and gone through that process. So absolutely can see that in you, Graham. Thank you. Isha.
Hi, I just wanted to mention as well, I think it depends where in your career you are. So I've recently had a career change, and I mentioned that I'm like a rationalizer. And I think it's hard to inspire and assert yourself when you're so new into the field. And I think it'll take some time to gain that like skills and things. I think because I'm working with so many people who are experts in the field, and I do feel like, oh, my style definitely keeps going back to rationalizing because others are not there yet.
Okay, and do you know what? That's a lovely little reflection there of that hierarchy that exists in the environment we work in. And actually, do you know what? Keep pushing being an inspirer, because this world needs more inspirers. We've already got a lot of asserters and a lot of rationalizers, but it's interesting what you described there about having gone back to that sort of rationalizing space, and I recognize it in myself, my younger self, if you like, going back into that. And I think the inspiring potentially does come with confidence and understanding of your own competence. But keep inspiring, Isha. That's fantastic. And then David, is that right?
It is, yeah. I was just reflecting on me. So I'm a project support officer, and mainly what I do is provide data for the project managers. So I'm definitely a rationalizer. I'll provide the information that they need to then do their job. But I am also then responsible to make sure that that is relevant to the audience. I can't just put numbers on a spreadsheet. It needs to be accessible. So that part of my role, I find I'm often doing the bridging, but to a minor degree, to then help the project managers to continue.
Love it. Thank you. You absolutely demonstrated there. Does it matter that you know what these things are called? Probably not. Just a recognition that if you are always asserting, there's which I've not heard from any of you in the group, but you think about those people that are always asserting, and you think, here we go again. We're not going to get a word in edgeways, or I'm not going to be able to get past this person. We've all had that situation. I once had a consultant who sat, folded his arms, and said, "So what you're telling me is," and I thought, oh, here we go. It's like, no, I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking you if you'll work with me on this, and that you just can't get past it. So yeah, thinking about what your styles are. Can you flex? Doesn't matter whether you know what they're called, but what might work differently. Why is it important? Oh, come on. Sorry, my mouse again. Why is it important? And if another slide here, which will give you some other prompts on there, but you'll see down the right hand side, some of these are push styles and some of them are pull. So push style, rationalizing, asserting, that's kind of, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take you there, I'm going to demonstrate the facts to you. Pull is much more in that, well, I'd like you to see this for yourself. I want to take you there. I want you to show what the future can look like. Come with me. So much more of that pull style. Obviously, negotiation somewhere in the middle there, you swap between the two. Important when we're thinking about what our role is in that, and sometimes you'll need to swap between them, but it does give you a different kind of view of the world, because it suggests a different kind of style and approach, which might be more about mentoring, might be about coaching. So that coaching is that non-directive, that kind of, come with me, that sort of we you find the answers for yourself, creating those bridging conversations, whereas mentor can be a lot more assertive, a lot more kind of I'm going to demonstrate this to you or give you the facts. So and that giving advice, and again, really important when we're thinking about how we want to work with people. And when you and this leads nicely into the last 5 minutes, I'm going to share something with you to give you something to think about. The conversation that we had about influence and persuading, I had that conversation with a colleague here. She's an OT, and she said, I don't like the idea of persuading people. And she said, it just feels a bit wrong. And I said, oh, it's great. And she's a wonderful woman. And I said, so in your clinical practice, you never stood with a patient at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and said to them, if you can get to the end of this bed this afternoon, just come on, stand up, let's see if we can get you there. We can get you home. And she went, yeah. I said, that is persuasion. And she said, oh, never thought about it. I said, and if you don't want to take my word for it, there's a guy called Cialdini who has put some principles of persuasion around it. So he talks about reciprocity, and some of you guys have touched on this. So reciprocity is that if you do something for me, I'll do something for you. So taking that example, if you can walk to the end of this bed, demonstrate this to me, I can send you home today. Yeah. Principle number 1. Commitment, desire to maintain consistency in what you've already said or done. So you can trust me. I've done it before. We've done this together. I promise you that, you know, I've demonstrated to you that you can trust me. Commitment number 2. So principle number 2, yeah, dotted the I's there. Social proof. Do you follow or lead people that are similar to you? So that kind of, you know, we are trusted professionals. We all work in this together. We create that sense of how are we all in this together? How are we all going to benefit? Yeah, that's the 3rd principle that we've got there. And I think it was Abby that talked about this. That liking, you know, we go to people that are like ourselves, don't we? So if somebody's kind of trying to create that relationship with you, you're more likely to be persuaded with them. I worked for a lady called Jackie Williams, who quite honestly, we disliked each other on site. By the time we'd worked together for about 6 months, I can honestly say that if she'd said to me, we're going to go and jump off this cliff, I'd have gone, okay. And I'd got hold of her hand and I'd have gone with her, because she'd done all of these things. She'd created the environment that we lived in, and liking had become a big part of it. Authority, it's a big one that we use in our jobs, isn't it? You know, I'm trying to be the expert in this. I'm trying to encourage people to take notice of me because I'm able to share good knowledge with them. And lastly, there's scarcity. So if something is, you know, a limited factor, and in the scenario that I was talking about there with your patient, you know, that scarcity is being at home. So getting a patient to work with you, because so you've created liking, you've demonstrated to them that you've got some sort of authority because of your role, and you're saying to them, actually, I can get you home. That's their scarcity. So in that really small example there, you can see all of those playing out. What you don't necessarily realise is that you've used all of those. What do people think about that as a model for persuasion? Isha likes it? What are other people thinking?
But for me, Sarah, it's shown that persuasion's much wider than I gave credit for. Yeah. You know, you sometimes have this negative connotation with the word persuasion, but actually it doesn't need to have that. No, and a lot of us are doing this every day in our work without giving any kind of credit to it, I suppose. So I'm going to leave it. I'm conscious it's 4 minutes to 11, and we're going to close. I'm going to leave you with that thought about
what I will do, there's a link to a little very short video that I'll send to Ashley, and we can share with you. It's on YouTube, that talks about this in more detail and about how can you use. It's only about 10 minutes, I think. You can just have a quick look at that, and then I'd leave it with you to think about how can you use this to create more diversity in the improvement work that you do. So rather than kind of always going down the same path, or how can you use these different aspects to get better results and create more diversity of thought, and because one of the things I think we have touched on today is that if you get people to talk to each other and engage in this in a different way, you will get more influence and persuasion. So how can you use these things? How can you use liking, for example, to create a better network of people? How can you use scarcity? So if you're inviting them to an event, make them feel special. Say, we've only got 10 tickets. Think about how when you're on Facebook or Twitter or something, and then you go on to another one and suddenly an advert for something that you never knew you needed just popped up, but because you've said it out loud or whatever, have a think about how you can use these tactics. I did have another couple of slides which I'm not going to share with you, just around some of the language that we use and why words that we use matter, and getting you to think about how you can use those different tactics. But as I say, I'll share those in the slide deck, and it's a bit of bonus material for you there. See what I did there? Used a different persuasion tactic there, a bit of bonus material. That's it from me, unless anybody's got anything that they wanted to ask or share. What I will say is, if anybody wants to get in contact, Ash does have email addresses, and I'm very happy to share. In fact, I'll stick it on the end slide. If anybody wants to get in contact with me about anything or ask anything, very happy. Been lovely to speak with you all this morning.
So thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, it's been absolutely fabulous. Really good. Definitely really raised our kind of self-awareness around influencing styles, and be a bit more strategic and plan how we go about things. So yeah, really good session.
I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and yeah, my passion is doing this, the soft stuff that's the really hard stuff, and how do we support leaders of improvement to do that. So if there's anything that you think I could be helpful with, or you'd like to talk about, give me a shout.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'm going to do this with another group all day now.
I'm a bit jealous. I think I want to come along as well. Thank you ever so much,
it's been a
Sarah.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to pop a date in everybody's diaries. Our next improvement network is on the 26th of January at 2 till 3:30. Oh, it's come in really big. Sorry, guys, in the chat box. But yeah, little date for your diaries for our next improvement session. Lovely.
Brilliant. Take care,
Thank you ever so much, guys. Take care.
Thanks. Nice to meet you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.